I'm Dan Barron. I am a board member, and usually what I do is ring the bell and get us everybody started at the courthouse. And Rhonda gives us the welcoming speech, and it's my turn, I guess, this evening. But we're just so glad that as many people as have shown up are here. This is a great way. We'd love to be able to see you face to face, but now we are able to see you face to face, but it's virtual. And it's a little bit better than not being able to share this kind of information at all. So we're glad that you are here. And I have seen parts of this presentation, and I know what a great job David has done in this. But I hope you will think about supporting the Mitchell County Historical Society. We would love to have you as a volunteer. We'd love to have your contributions, if you would, please. We're working on several different projects, one of which is the Penland Cemetery. And we're still working on that. But most importantly, thank you all for coming tonight. And I'm going to turn everything over to David, and I'll mute my mic and I'll mute my face. Thank you, David, for doing this.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Just real quick, again, this is a presentation that we actually did a couple of years ago, but the recording didn't work out for it. So we do not have it recorded, and that was one of the reasons we wanted to do it again this evening. And we had several people who wanted to come to the presentation back in 2018, and they didn't get to. So we're going to show some things from that, but I've added a few things to it that we didn't show before, and going to try to answer some questions. But I kind of wanted to get started, so I'm going to turn off my video, and let's make sure I get my screen here up and running. There we go. If you can see, I wanted to let you see we do have an online store, and I'm going to refer to a couple of things at the beginning of the presentation that are for sale in the online store. Let me hit that. There we go. I think I got that up and running now. So, if you really want to help us out, we have books, we have Christmas ornaments, we've got all sorts of stuff that we are selling in our store. And we do ask that you maybe stop by MitchellNCHistory.org and just click the store home you see, or the store button in the top bar, and it'll take you over here and you can look around at what we've got. We do have a brand new Christmas ornament, and I don't have a photo of the new one, but it is of the Poplar School, and we'll have information on it coming up here in just a little bit. Okay, let me check. Is everything looking, can you see the screen? Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me hit my button here, and we'll put this photo up. This is the Cloudland Hotel. This is made around 1884 or 85, and this is the first summer that it was open. And this is John T. Wilder's resort atop Roan Mountain that we're going to be talking about this evening. So the Cloudland Hotel. And again, this is a group that was there visiting that summer. So we're going to tell you a little bit more about hopefully some of these folks and some interesting stuff about this building as we move forward. So let's start first and let you know that we do have a Christmas ornament for the Cloudland. This one came out, like I said, a couple of years ago. It'll be 3 years ago this Christmas. But this was the 7th in our series. And it is available for sale on the store. Tell you a little bit about the drawing you see there. In the middle, it was inspired by this right here, which was located in an ad for the Cloudland. This ran around 1887. And as you see, it's just a drawing of the building to kind of give you an idea of what's going on. But you see the logo there in the lower right corner for the Cloudland Hotel. And we use that as the inspiration for our ornament that we did. So let's move on and talk a little bit about the Cloudland. First off, let me tell you, some of what you're going to hear discussed tonight will be found in this article. It's called The Cloudland Hotel, a Mammoth Landmark of Its Day, and it's on the MitchellNCHistory.org website. So stop by there if you want to read a little bit. There's some stuff in there that I won't be touching on, or that we go a little bit more in depth than we will tonight in the presentation. So let's get started with a lay of the land on top of the mountain. First off, this photo probably again around 1886, 1887, somewhere in that neighborhood. The hotel, of course, situated atop Roan Mountain. It is near the present day parking lot that's just before you get on the gravel road to go out to the rhododendron gardens. So it's that paved parking lot where the restrooms are at, just after you pass the booth with the Forest Service, to go on up and look at the flowers. Now, the inn stood up on the hill above the parking lot, and there is no trace of its foundation left up there. There is, in this photo, though, something that's very rare. It had been debated over the years what structures were on the mountain at what time. And I want to point out the three of them that you can see in the photo. The first one here in the front of the picture, that is the old, what we'll call hunting lodge, the Cloudland Hunting Lodge. It was built around 1877, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was roughly where the parking lot is at today. Then in the middle, you'll see a small house. That is General Wilder's hunting cabin that he put up on the mountain. It was really for him and his family, but he also took special friends there. I'm going to tell you a special story about it a little bit later in the presentation. This, of course, was when he purchased the 7,000 acres of property up on the Rhone. He put the cabin up there so he could relax and enjoy it. Then decided that, well, let's have a little hunting lodge. It took off, and he made the decision then to build the 3-story structure that you see there barely in the back. I know it blends into the sky there a little bit, but that is the Cloudland Hotel, 166 rooms, 3 stories tall, and only 4 bathrooms in it. We'll probably come back and talk about that a little bit more later. Now, the last thing you see, of course, is the horse in the picture. That is the road that leads away from the hotel's complex to the Rhone High Bluff. And you've probably wandered out there if you've been up on the Rhone. It's just past the rhododendron gardens. And we're going to show you some photos of it a little bit later that are kind of interesting that these folks did back in the 1800s. Now, this book written by Jennifer Bauer, I do suggest if you would like a more comprehensive review of Roan Mountain, Jennifer's book is awesome. It came out in 2011. It is from the History Press in Charleston, South Carolina. We have it for sale on our online store, but she goes really into depth about a lot of stuff about the Cloudland, about the Rhone, about Wilder, and a lot of different things. I think you would really enjoy it if you want a good read about Roan Mountain. And again, the book's about 10 years old. It happens to be an updated version of one that she put out in the 1990s. But I do suggest you take a look at it. If you haven't, I think you'd really enjoy it. Now, this is the gentleman we want to talk about tonight, Union Brevet General John T. Wilder. And a little bit about General Wilder. First off, he was born in the Catskill Mountains of New York, January 31st, 1830. Both his grandfather and great-grandfather, who were both named Seth Wilder, they fought in the American Revolution. His father, Reuben Wilder, fought in the War of 1812. Now, John, when he got up into his teenage years, he decided he wanted to seek his fortune elsewhere, so he headed west and stopped in Columbus, Ohio in 1849 and became an apprentice millwright at a foundry. Now, this lays the groundwork for some future career plans for John that we'll be talking about later. In 1857, he leaves and moves to Indiana. He marries a young lady, and they raise a large family. There's a bunch of kids in the family, and he established a foundry of his own in Indiana. And while there, he invented several hydraulic machines that he patented and started selling this equipment throughout the United States. He was also renowned as an expert in hydraulics at that time. And when the Civil War starts, he is commissioned a captain in Company A of the 17th Indiana Infantry Regiment and is sent to Western Virginia, so actually into what is nowadays West Virginia. They were later reorganized as the 26th Battery, the Light Artillery, and he was made a lieutenant colonel at that time. In March 1862, his unit fought in the Battle of Corinth. His most notable battle, though, was September 15th and 16th in 1862. Confederate General Braxton Bragg basically attacked his garrison in Munfordville, Kentucky. He had 4,000 men in this garrison. They were surrounded by Bragg's army of 22,000. Bragg demanded he surrender. Wilder asked for him to explain why he ought to surrender. He had Wilder blindfolded and led behind the Confederate lines under a flag of truce, and Major General Simon Buckner demonstrated to Wilder why he was prone to surrender, what forces he was up against. He was suitably impressed, so he goes back, surrenders his garrison on September 17th. He then spends 2 months as a prisoner of war before he was exchanged for Confederate prisoners and goes back to battle. And that's where we're going to talk about here, because we had some local fellows in this battle that we're going to discuss, Chickamauga, down near Chattanooga, and this is going to come into play a little bit later with Wilder. So after he was exchanged and went back to the North, he becomes a commander again, leads 4 regiments in light artillery, the 17th, 18th, and 72nd Indiana. He's also in charge of the 98th and 123rd Illinois regiments. They were known as the Lightning Brigade, and they rode horses and mules. And there's a cool story about them I want to tell real quick. They carried what was called the Spencer repeating rifle. This let them fire more rapidly than the enemy. Now, Wilder had requested these rifles for his troops, but the government, under their traditional government way, had red tape, and it slowed down purchasing these guns. So Wilder then asked the men to buy the guns themselves, and each one of them signed a loan for $35 to purchase their weapon, and they did it unanimously for him. And he presents this to the government. Well, the U.S. government gets a little bit of egg on their face. They're embarrassed, and they paid for the guns before the men had to and sent them to them. They then head into Tennessee, and the most famous battle they're involved with there is at Chickamauga, which, of course, is near Chattanooga. He led a diversion that was launched that took part in several battles there. Chattanooga would again play a major role in his later life. And after Chickamauga, he led the brigade to the Atlanta campaign in the summer of 1864, where he was promoted to brevet general on August 7th. Now, this is a rank that they give for gallantry or meritorious service, but it's not a formal promotion for a military officer. During the campaign, he suffered failing health. He had bouts of typhoid fever and dysentery dating back to 1862. So he resigns his commission in October of 1864 and returns to Indiana and his family, and is basically going to live out his life, supposedly. Now, there is a monument to that Lightning Brigade at Chickamauga, and you'll see the photo here on the left is the members of the brigade at the 1903 reunion underneath the monument, and the modern day photo of it is there on the right. So you can visit this monument at the Chickamauga battlefield today. So why did Wilder load up and come south from Indiana following the war and come into Tennessee? Well, let's answer that, I hope. The failing health, of course, is a major factor. He felt that a milder climate would be beneficial to him, but his time in Tennessee convinced him that there was an abundance of natural resources in the region, and he vowed to return to explore their economic possibilities. So he moves to Rockwood, Tennessee, a little west of Knoxville, and builds and operates a blast furnace. He later moves to Chattanooga, where he founds an ironworks and manufactures rails for the railroads. He's elected mayor of Chattanooga in 1871. He resigns that post in 1872, he says, to run his businesses because he felt like he was not doing them justice. Then he unsuccessfully runs for Congress in 1876 and is appointed postmaster of Chattanooga in 1877, and he serves until 1882 when his involvement with Roan Mountain begins. Now, before we get to that, let's kind of finish up what happens with Wilder later in his life, and then we'll spend the rest of the time on the Roan. He moved back from Roan Mountain to Knoxville, Tennessee in 1897 after President McKinley appointed him a federal pension agent. He later served as commissioner of the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, and he died in Jacksonville, Florida, October 20th, 1917. He is buried in Chattanooga. So that's John T. Wilder that we're going to be talking about this evening. So let's turn our attention now to Roan Mountain. This view is one that Marcia and I snapped 20 years ago, probably, coming up the Tennessee side of the mountain near the top at Carver's Gap. This might be a view that visitors to the Cloudlands saw on their way up the mountain from Roan Mountain, Tennessee back in the day. So let's talk a little bit about some of the previous visitors to the mountain and some of their comments. Did you know that Elisha Mitchell visited Roan Mountain? Of course, Mount Mitchell's named for him. Mitchell County is named for him. He explored the mountain and was trying to determine if it was the highest in Eastern America. He was very fond of the Roan, and this is a statement he gave for it. It was the, quote, easiest of access and most beautiful of all the high mountains. He also noted, quote, with the exception of the body of rocks, looking like the ruins of an old castle near its southwestern extremity, that would be the Roan High Bluff, by the way. The top of the Roan might be described as a vast meadow, 9 miles in length, with some interruptions, at maximum elevation of 6,038 feet. And remember, he's measuring this using a barometer. So he's making it best an educated guess, and he's pretty close. 6,200 feet was its height. So anyways, let's move on. There was no trees to obstruct anything up there. He says a person may gallop his horse a mile or two, Carolina at his feet on one side, Tennessee on the other, and a green ocean of mountains raised to tremendous billows immediately around him. It was the pasture ground for young horses of the whole country during the summer. He continues and says they found strawberry there in great abundance of the finest quality in regard to both size and flavor on the 30th of July. So that's Elisha Mitchell's encounter with Roan Mountain. Now let's talk about Asa Gray for just a moment. He visited Roan Mountain in the 1840s. He declared it, quote, the most beautiful mountain east of the Rockies, unquote. He, of course, discovered the lily that bears his name while visiting Roan Mountain, and you can see it bloom. It'll be in late June, early July, and that's one of them you see there. Okay, let's talk about how Roan Mountain got its name for a minute. Some speculated that Andre Michaud named the mountain after the Rhone Valley, where he was born and raised when he lived in Europe. He claimed the view was mimicked in the views of the mountain, but we do know he was not from the Rhone Valley. Others speculated it was named for the Rhone color of the mountain when the rhododendrons in bloom. It's at a distance. Others argued that Daniel Boone was in the region a whole lot, and he left an exhausted Rhone-colored horse to wander the mountaintop one time when he went into Kentucky. And when he come back, the horse was supposedly in great shape after being left on the balls to roam, eat, rest, and recover. Others have speculated that the mountain ash trees, which were known in older times as Rowan trees, grew profusely in the area, and they gave the mountain a unique color. Now, there's also an Indian legend that there were 3 major battles on top of the Rhone, and warriors' blood helped nourish the flowers and made them crimson, and that's what gave it the color. So that's some of the ways Roan Mountain may have got its name, but we, again, don't know for sure exactly how that happened. So let's turn back to tonight's subject. Wilder moved to Roan Mountain in 1884, and he lived there until about 1892. He built a house in Roan Mountain, Tennessee. This is a picture of it, and the house is still standing in the Tennessee town. Now, while he lived in the region, he helped promote and construct the Charleston, Cincinnati, and Chicago Railroad. Now, the reason that's of interest to us around here, that was a precursor to what later becomes the Clinchfield Railroad. A couple other things about Wilder that's kind of interesting. He developed an area of Johnson City that is known as Carnegie, near where ETSU is today. There's a whole row of, I'll call them company houses. You'll see they all look kind of the same just before you get to the campus. That's Carnegie, right in that area. Now, this had an iron-making foundry, railroad manufacturing operation, and they would mine iron ore in Cranberry, which at that time was in Mitchell County, and they would transport it to the factories in Carnegie via the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad, which is also known as the Eat Taters and Wear No Clothes Railroad, and more popularly known around here as Tweetsie. Speaking of, let's look at General Wilder. Here he is with his family. This is on the porch a couple of years after they opened their house in Roan Mountain. This is the sitting room inside the house. And this, believe it or not, I've had several ask me, we don't have any pictures of the interior of the inn, but this is the interior of what was called the Nasturtium Cottage, sorry about that. And this would be the sitting parlor. So maybe that gives us a rough idea of what some of it might have looked like at that time. So now these were his horses. in the 1880s, they're kind of wandering around in the Doe River down there in Roan Mountain, Tennessee. And here they are riding along the Doe River in the 1880s. And I'll speculate this might be roughly where the road is today, heading up to Roan Mountain, but we don't really know. But there they are along the river in the 1880s. So let's talk about the top of the mountain. Wilder visited the Roan. He was tracing veins of magnetic iron ore southwestward from Cranberry at the time. I guess everybody knows the community of Beuladine is originally called Wilder's Forge. And it was also known as Magnetic City because of these iron deposits. Wilder had small mines all the way to the Nolichucky River down in the Poplar community. I bet a lot of folks didn't know that. There were several iron ore mines in the northern end of Mitchell County. And Wilder apparently prospected for iron all the way through western North Carolina and into North Georgia. Views like this was the Round Bald, Engine Gap, and Jane Bald. This was made sometime in the early 19-teens, this photo. And he was said to be intrigued by these balds on top of the mountain. So in 1870, he purchased 7,000 acres on the top of the mountain and then decides to build a cabin up there where his family and others could enjoy the mountain. And then in 1877, he constructs what becomes the first Cloudland Hotel. This is what I'll call the Hunting Lodge. It was a 20-room hotel. It was located, like I said, down roughly where the parking lot is today, the paved parking lot there on top of Roan Mountain, between Roan High Knob and Roan High Bluff. It was very popular. And Wilder realized quickly that, due to this popularity, that a larger hotel might be a big moneymaker. So he makes a commitment that he's going to do something about it. There's another photo of the hotel with some folks on the front of it. And so here is his cabin. Let's talk about it briefly. Again, it was built early on, and this was just where he and his friends could stay when they went on hunting trips. And you'll see he is sitting on the porch there with a hat on, sitting down with his family and some other friends at the clubhouse. And it was called the NC Clubhouse. I guess it's set in North Carolina a little bit. The latter 3-story Cloudland Hotel would be off to the right, and then the other one we saw just a moment ago would be to the left of this clubhouse or this cabin in this photo. So here he is atop Roan Mountain in the 1880s, and he really enjoyed a repose from life when he come up on the Roan. And this is something that was cited in the June 14th, 1879 edition of the Knoxville Daily Chronicle about the Roan. I thought I'd read this verbatim, and it kind of, I think captures the spirit of what Wilder might have felt. The correspondent noted, quote, "I've often heard of the Roan, but any description falls far short of conveying anything like a clear conception of the beauty and grandeur of the scene. Standing on the summit, one can see clouds floating hundreds of feet below while the sun is shining brightly from above. Then again, the winds will sweep away the clouds hanging around the sides of the mountain and uncover the vast gorges lying beneath, which are rarely trodden by the foot of man. The ball grounds are covered with grass and stock in great numbers and excellent condition, and you can see the stock grazing on these natural meadows. General Wilder has a herd of Angora goats on the mountain. No doubt this would be a very profitable business, as there's no place in America better adapted to the production of grass than the rich coves around the sides of this mountain. The air on the top of the Roan is cool and bracing, even in the warmest part of the day, while at night it's necessary to have fires in the rooms. While I'm now riding, there is a bright, cheerful fire from the wood of the balsam fir blazing in the hearth, and it certainly adds much to the comfort of the room," unquote. Now, this correspondent most likely was staying in the hunting lodge at the time he wrote this story. He was not actually in the big Cloudland Hotel. So there are also accounts about Mitchell County that were written during this time with these stories about Cloudland. In the 1887, or July 23rd, 1887 edition of the Southern Standard, another journalist noted, quote, "Within the bounds of Mitchell County, North Carolina, every mineral known to commerce, except coal has been discovered. In this respect, it's the most remarkable county in the world. Numerous mica mines are being worked there. Every one of them show unmistakable evidences of having been operated by a prehistoric race of people hundreds of years before America was discovered by Columbus," unquote. So Mitchell County mentioned in the paper a little bit along with the Clallan Hotel. Virgin forests stood atop the Rhone. The size of the trees were first growth nature, and it belied that. This bowl you see here with the girls sitting in it was hollowed out of a knot found on one of the trees on the mountain, and he poses with them in behind the bowl there. Kind of a neat little something there with General Wilder. So now, if he wanted to build the Clallan, it was going to take a lot of wood. So Wilder sets up a sawmill in the Doe River Valley near the town of Roan Mountain. It outputs the timbers used in the construction. And this sawmill produced 1.5 million board feet of lumber that was used to build the Clallan Hotel. And it's a photo of it there, probably early on in when it was set up. We've already talked about this photo just a little bit, but let's go ahead and back up and tell you a little bit more here. Again, in 1885, Wilder opens a much larger venue on Roan Mountain. It's called the Clallan Hotel, three-story structure with 166 rooms. It had what was then considered to be modern amenities, including spring mattresses in each bed and indoor bathrooms. Now, the big deal about that is when you slept in the bed, most likely you didn't have a spring mattress. You used hay, or you used it, if you were lucky, you had down. But they were actually getting to experience these new spring mattresses at the Clallan. Views from the verandas revealed 7 different states when the mist would clear, which was only about 25% of the time. So most of the time they were in the clouds, but every once in a while it would open up and they could really see. The state line between North Carolina and Tennessee ran through the center of the dining room. It was marked inside across the table and floor. General Wilder was a teetotaler, but alcohol was sold in the inn or in the hotel, and it was consumed, but it was only on the Tennessee side of the hotel. It was illegal to have alcohol in North Carolina, and there were reports the Mitchell County Sheriff would sit just across the state line, and he would arrest anyone who accidentally wandered across or was drinking illegally in the Tar Heel State. And if we're looking at this photo, North Carolina would be on the left with that back portion you see behind there. That would have been in Tennessee. So got a little bit more here for you. We've already seen this photo, but here's another article from Among the Clouds. The Tennessee Press Association had a meeting at the Clallan Hotel. This would have been in July of 1887, and they posted this description at the Southern Standard. And this is what he said, quote, "The peculiar directions of the state line between North Carolina and Tennessee gets one considerably confused in geography. Now, it would be generally supposed that North Carolina is east of Tennessee, but the eastern end of the Clallan Hotel, that's the back part we just talked about, lies in Tennessee, while its western end is in North Carolina. In the Tennessee side of the house, you are surrounded on 3 sides by North Carolina. On the North Carolina side, you're surrounded on 3 sides by the state of Tennessee. The 2 states are hooked together, something like the matter of a patent car coupler for a train. It made 3 parallel state lines for a short distance, across the center of which the hotel is built." I'm sure the old boy had that figured out before he built the hotel, and that was going to be a selling point when he put it up there. Okay, here's another photo of it at a distance, and you can see there is the cabin, but you'll notice at the left, the hunting lodge is gone in this photo. Now, there was a fellow who served as a room clerk. His name was E. Frank Shell, and he spoke about his experiences working at the Clallan in a 1953 article in the Asheville Citizen. He noted the hotel did not open at that time until July 10th. So the bloom of the rhododendron gardens would have been gone by the time it opened. He noted rates were $10 per week. That's about $250 per week in today's money. That included a room and 3 meals per day, but you had no private bathroom. Again, there were only 4 bathrooms for all 166 rooms in the hotel. Diners were served by young ladies from the Asheville Industrial School. They enjoyed fare from a first and second cook and a pastry chef. Livestock were driven up the mountain each season and were pastured until they were slaughtered for meat. The midday dinner and supper menus featured at least 6 vegetables and several rich desserts, and oil lamps were used for illumination at that time. And that dining hall we talked about, well, it seated 100 people. And here is a place setting from the Cloudland Hotel. And you can see this down in Roan Mountain State Park. They have a small museum and they have some things on display. As mentioned here again, the place setting. And this is one of the beds from the Cloudland. It's a bedstead from up there that existed at the time. So guests enjoyed spring mountain water. And I had a question about this, and I wanted to make sure we shared this for that question. First off, the water was 46 degrees in temperature in the middle of July. So it was brisk and it was cool and it was refreshing. But it came from a spring on the mountain, and Wilder set up what would have been a very modern waterworks at that time that supplied the hotel. And you're looking at the collection pond for the spring, and then he piped it up to the hotel a little bit above it. So I thought that was kind of interesting that we had that question, and I'm tickled we had the answer for it, and we could show you the actual waterworks on top of the Rhone. Okay, another photo. Looking at it, you can see the road, coming up from the right. That would be coming up from Carver's Gap. It kind of moves up there to the front of the hotel. The one you see in the front is again heading out to the Roan High Bluff. Now, let's talk a little bit about this road that came up to Roan Mountain in the 1880s. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about the North Carolina side. I had someone ask where exactly the hack line for the North Carolina side came up. Did it come up Carver's Gap like it does today? And the answer is no. The original hack line came from Beulah Dean, which of course was called Wilder's Forge. But there was a hack line that came up from Beulah Dean on the North Carolina side, and that's how they ascended to get up to the Cloudland. Now, tell you a little bit about the journey from Tennessee. This again recorded in newspapers is why we know about it. It took several hours to complete the 12-mile journey from the Roan Mountain Inn, which we'll tell you more about in a moment, up to the Cloudland. Again, the Tennessee Press Association met there, and this is how they described the trip. The press party reached Roan Mountain Station about 8:30 on Wednesday morning, July 13th. 8 large hacks, about 20 saddle horses were waiting to convey the party to the Cloudland. Some 4 or 5 of the horsemen pushed ahead, reached the Cloudland a few minutes past 12 o'clock, so it took them about 4 hours. The rider who's riding in one of the hacks, he had he secured a good saddle horse. He made the journey up the mountain in a little more than 5 hours. He got to Cloudland about 2:15. It took them until 4 o'clock to get everybody else up the mountain. So it took nearly 8 hours for those hacks to get up the road, the 12 miles from Roan Mountain, Tennessee to the Cloudland. You can see the hack road. If you look back in the distance there in the kind of mid to upper left, you'll see the road running in. That is running along around 1897. They would come up this roughly along the path of today's Tennessee Highway 143, and then they cut out the ridge line at Carver's Gap and went out to the hotel. Now, I did read in Jennifer's book, and I don't have it noted here, but let me quickly let you know that a portion of that old hack line is still preserved, and you can walk down it to the state park from the Tennessee side. In the 1905 brochure about the Cloudland, the hotel boasted guests could play golf, tennis, bowling. They could enjoy target shooting, and there was cards and dancing in the evenings. The brochure also touted the Cloudland with the highest golf course east of the Mississippi, if not the United States. Just think of playing golf 6,294 feet above sea level, where the average temperature is only 60 degrees during the season, is what it boasted in the brochure. Now, we don't know the exact location of where the course was at or the number of holes that it featured. You can see in this photo, you got some guests here preparing for a horseback ride, heading out on the ridge of the Rhone. Excuse me. This is a photo that Chris Hollifield and I ran into down in the North Carolina collection at UNC. This is a picture of a picnic on top of Roan Mountain, and it's made in 1884. We do not know anything about any of the people. Would love to know about the picture, but don't have any information. I kind of doubt they're locals from either Tennessee or North Carolina. Now, treks to Roan High Knob were a common occurrence. Guests would climb on the craggy rocks to enjoy the spectacular views of North Carolina and Tennessee to the south and west. And there you see, they're literally out on the edge of the mountain. A little bit braver than probably me. But kind of an interesting pose there, I think, with them out at the Roan High Knob. Also, several photos of guests on the Cloudland who would pose during their stay atop the mountain. Of course, everybody with their parasols out to protect from the sun, but enjoying the day, or maybe it may have been raining a little bit while they were there. Who knows? Again, here's the Roan High Bluff. A couple of other statements to let you know about. In a September 3rd, 1888 article in the Tennessean newspaper, a correspondent describes an August storm on the Cloudland. He said the proprietor described the storm where it was, quote, raining all over the world with 100-mile-an-hour winds and no hope of its ending. The temperature at the time was 54 degrees at 4:30 in the afternoon. There was a big fire going in the fireplace. The correspondent and a companion spent the night thinking they'd have to turn back on their trip. They were heading over the Roan to Mount Mitchell, but they arose the next morning at 4:30, looked out and saw an ocean of clouds below them in the valleys and clear sky above with a sunrise in the east. They left descending to Bakersville through a fog, where they arrived for dinner at the end of a political riot in town. They discovered the Democrats were in the majority in Bakersville, and they had erected a Grover Cleveland banner, which the, quote, Rocky Creek Cove Republicans, unquote, some 60 strong, had followed them down and shot that flag to pieces, and they erected a banner for Benjamin Harrison. One man was shot in the ear, and a number got bullet holes in their clothes, but after much speech making, it was agreed that neither side would put a banner up for their candidate, quote, and the Mountaineers went home, unquote. The writer and his accompanying friend continued their journey to visit Mount Mitchell the next day. So there's a little something for you on a trip off the Roan. Roan High Bluff here in the 1880s, there was, a picture of a man. I guess you could say, I do not know the name of this formation or if you can even see it anymore, if it's even still there. But again, that photo made in the 1880s on the mountain. Now, Roan Mountain, Tennessee is the community where most of Wilder's activity takes place. Again, they would come up from the Beulah Dean side, and they would disembark in Marion off the railroad, come to Beulah Dean, and then come up the mountain. But Wilder would have them stop the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railway on a trip from Johnson City here in Roan Mountain, Tennessee, and that's where they would begin the Roan Mountain adventure. This is his home. Again, another photo of it in the 1880s with the Doe River running behind it. He was a big believer in railroads, Wilder was. He believed they would be an economic catalyst for the region. And in 1886, he got a charter for and became a partner in the Charleston, Cincinnati, and Chicago Railroad, the Triple C. It was to run from Charleston, South Carolina to Ashland, Kentucky in an effort to mine coal and iron ore in the Appalachians. Construction began in Rutherford, North Carolina. It ran both north and south. Major investor was Baker Brothers and Company. They failed in 1893 when the line was then reorganized as the Ohio River and Charleston Railway Company. That later went bankrupt also. This laid the groundwork for the Carolina, Clinchfield, and Ohio, CC&O, that was formed by George Carter, who completed the route in 1907. Wilder apparently escaped financial ruin from this endeavor, but like other business ventures, he would pioneer ideas that others would then profit from. And these are a couple of photos of railroad activity near Roan Mountain, Tennessee. This is, of course, the Roan Mountain Station. Wilder used the ET and WNC depot as the disembarking point for visitors to the Cloudland. Tweetsie would stop here on its way from Johnson City, deposit visitors for their trip up the mountain. Now, this depot would have been near the present-day drugstore in downtown Roan Mountain. So if you know where the little drugstore is there on 19E, across the road from it would be roughly where the depot sat. Now, before those visitors took off on the 12-mile journey up the mountain, they usually would spend the evening at the Wilder Inn. It was located across the tracks from the depot, and there's a photo of it. You can see some of the guests posing on the porch of the inn while enjoying their stay before they begin the trip up to the Cloudland. This photo is of N.L. Murrell. He's the third from the left, sitting kind of above everybody else. He was one of the proprietors of the Cloudland Hotel. He ran it for about 10 years in the late 1880s. Stereoscopic views of famous locations were very popular in the 1800s. The Cloudland Hotel is preserved in several images, and this is one of them right here. Slides were mounted in a viewer, and you'd look through them, it would give a 3D effect, and a well-preserved slide taken from the Carver's Gap side of the mountain looking back at the hotel. Okay, let's move on. Here's another slide from that same time frame. And again, if you were looking at it, it would look like, 3D, kind of like your Viewmaster things from when I was a kid. Rough description of what that was. Now, here we have some ads for the Cloudland. The ones on the left ran in the Lenore News Topic. The ones in the middle were found in the Atlanta Constitution, and the one on the right during the NL Mural Management. We do not know where these were run, but as you can see, they are kind of a more modern look for the hotel, especially with that one on top, but again, trying to attract attention and bring people and visitors to the mountain. In 1895, August 17th, the Asheville Citizen ran this ad where you could go spend a weekend for $17.50. That is roughly $525.30 in today's money for the weekend on the road. Now, let's talk a little bit about some other things that took place on the mountain while this was all going on. This is Helen Edson, the lady in the middle. She is one of the first who tried to come up with an explanation of the Rhone balds. She was from New York. She spent a winter at Wilder's cabin between the two hotels in the 1880s, documenting the effects of the cold and moisture at high altitudes. She then published an article called Frost Forms on Rhone Mountain that included photos showing the frost buildup on the vegetation and documenting how a winter storm affects the plant life on the mountain. The frozen vapor of wind and rain combined with the velocity of wind and exposure of the vegetation to these elements would determine its growth, is what she argued. The extreme exposure at this altitude is what causes the absence of trees on Rhone Mountain, according to Edson. However, research on the subject has never confirmed that hypothesis as to why the balds are on the mountain. There were some famous folks that visited the hotel. Charles Dudley Warner, one of Mark Twain's big buddies and a writer of his own nature. He was a visitor to the Cloudland. He wrote in his book in 1888, it was called On Horseback, the book, and he notes, quote, "The advantage of the Rhone is that one can live there and be occupied for a long time in mineral and botanical study. Its mild climate, moisture, and great elevation make it unique in the country for the botanist." However, Warner didn't give all praise for the hotel. He said, while it set a good table, it, quote, "rocked like a ship at sea," unquote, when the wind would blow. This is John Muir. He was another famous visitor, a naturalist. He was born in 1838 in Scotland, and he turned a blinding eye injury in 1867 into a crusade where he turned his view to the fields and woods, and he walked over large areas of the United States, visiting Cuba and Panama, but he spent a large amount of time on the west coast of the U.S. and formed the Sierra Club in 1892 to, quote, "do something for the wilderness and make the mountains glad," unquote. He visited the Cloudland and wrote to his wife in September 23rd, 1898, and this is a quick little piece from his letter to her. "Dear Louise, we drove here from Cranberry yesterday, a distance of about 18 miles, through the most beautiful deciduous forest I ever saw. All tile landscapes in every direction are made up of mountains, a billowing sea of them without bounds as far as one can look. And every mountain, hill, and ridge and hollow is densely forested. So many kinds of trees that their mere names would simply fill this sheet. And now they're beginning to put on one of their purple and gold Liriodendron, Nyssa, sassafras, oxyhedron, and mountain ash show. Tilla birch, beech hickory, and ash magnolia, 3 species, chestnut, and maples. I wish I could hand you a bouquet of these leaves because beauty is perfectly enchanting. After lunch yesterday, we walked 5 miles along the mountaintop to where the storms of winter prevent the trees from growing. The open broad ridge top for miles is covered with rhododendron about 5 feet high, which in flower must make a glorious show. Around the base of the rhododendron clumps, there is a rich bossy growth of, I'm going to mess this up, Leophilium buxifolia. I hope I got that right. A charming heathwort. The temperature on the Rhone is distinctly alpine, and for the first time since I left home, I feel like my old self. I've been quite miserable, but the air has healed me. Wanda, Helen, love you all from your loving husband, John Muir. He died in 1914. So he visited the hotel 10 years before his death, somewhere in there. The hotel's final season that it operated was in 1905 in terms of a regular season. Now, caretakers of the building would occasionally open it for guests after that. And the final season it was ever operated for anyone was in 1913. This is the final photo of it in operation. It was made by a D.R. Beeson Sr. He was a Johnson City architect. And in fact, his firm had, I believe, a little bit of a hand in designing Mitchell High School. He took this photo during an outing in 1913. So this is the last picture we have really of the hotel as an operational structure. Now, with the closing of the hotel as a business, it didn't take long for it to begin deteriorating. As early as 1915, the building is beginning to collapse, as you can see here in the photo. The building quickly fell into disrepair, and it was torn down, with the lumber being sold piecemeal and used to build structures on both sides of the mountain in Tennessee and North Carolina. Now, I do know there's several homes in the Glen Eyre community that feature woodwork from the hotel on their porches and other parts of their houses. I've actually been to one of those houses. It's kind of neat. But again, as you can see here, it is collapsing in on itself. So somewhere between 1915 and 1927, the final remnants of the wooden structure disappeared. Now, there was a report in the Johnson City Press that the remnants of the hotel burned in 1924. And in fact, we had a testimony or whatever from a gentleman that we'll talk about a little bit later as involved the Rhododendron Festival, who claimed as a child that he saw it burn. But we've not been able to verify that. In fact, we had one gentleman, a Pierce Julian, a resident of Roan Mountain, Tennessee, who disputed that it burned and reiterated the claims that it was dismantling the wood used in structures throughout the region. In the late 1920s, stones of the foundation were still visible, but these two again disappeared in the ensuing decades, and none of that foundation's up there now, at least in terms of it looking like, this. One of General Wilder's heirs had announced plans to construct a new Cloudland Hotel atop the mountain near the location of the original in 1927, but those plans never materialized. Roan Edith Googe. This is an interesting story. Roan Edith Googe Jones, I missed her last name. She was the only child that was ever born in the Cloudland Hotel proper. Her mother and father, Mr. and Mrs. John Googe, operated the hotel at the end of its run, and Mrs. Jones was born there on April 29th, 1910, and she went back to the mountain to visit the inn every summer until she claimed the lightning struck the hotel remains and it burned to the ground. Again, there's dispute over that. In an article in the June 24th, 1963 edition of the Asheville Citizen, she was introduced atop the Roan during the 17th North Carolina Rhododendron Festival after the pageant officials discovered her secret about being born there. And here's a picture of her. However, we have learned that a boy was apparently born to a Major Searles, who was one of the innkeepers at the original 20-room hotel in the summer of 1881, which would make him the first child known to have been born on the mountain. So now, after the Cloudland's demise, lumberjacks began their work cutting the timber and removing the rhododendron. There was a plank road constructed on both sides of the mountain to allow modern trucks access to the mountain to gather these items for transport to markets. And there's a photo of the famous plank road in the 1920s. In 1941, the U.S. Forest Service takes over Roan Mountain, and they begin attempting to utilize the extreme height of the mountain for fire prevention. They construct a spotter's tower and cabin out on the Roan High Knob. There you see a photo of both of them. However, like at Mount Mitchell, the Forest Service quickly realized the tower was basically useless as it was in the clouds 3/4 of the time. They later dismantled it. It was taken down to Locust Knob near Bakersville and re-erected, and it was there for nearly 70 years. It's only recently been taken off of Locust Knob. Now, the cabin is still up there, and it is a shelter for hikers along the Appalachian Trail. There's some other views from the fire tower that was made back one of the days it was clear. And by the way, they did have a telegraph and telephone line that was run up to it. And that's what the fellow's doing there on the left, is he's stringing the lines up to the fire tower. Now, let's talk about something that was proposed in the 1950s on top concerning the Cloudland. So first off, The U.S. government declared their intent to purchase the 7,000 acres that belonged to Wilder's heirs. In 1940, they were going to pay $4.18 per acre. In today's money, they paid a little over $500,000 for that 7,000 acres on top of the mountain. This was completed in August 1941, just before the start of World War II. For years, a committee worked to bring development to the mountain over the years between 1941 and the 1950s. There was a Roan Mountain Advisory Committee that was formed. It was made up of S.T. Henry, who was the publisher of the Tri-County News here in Spruce Pine, William Waddell of Elizabethton, Tennessee, Wayne Graybill of Roan Mountain, Tennessee, Joe Summers of Johnson City, Tennessee, John C. McBee of Bakersville, North Carolina, K.C. Guy of Newland, W.E. Anglin of Burnsville, B.H. Winters of Elk Park, J.J. Hampton and Bill Stone of Bristol, Tennessee, and Judge Fred Booth of Irwin, Tennessee. And they all worked with government planners to come up with ways to develop the mountain and enhance it for tourism. Now, other people that worked were D.J. Morris, who was the supervisor of Pisgah National Forest, George Vitus, the district ranger, and Forest Service officials from Tennessee. Wilder heirs Frank Stratton, who owned the Westchester Power Company, and Edith Scott, who was General Wilder's youngest daughter. Her husband, by the way, was Arthur Hoyt Scott of the famous Scott Paper Company. Yes, Scott Tissue fame. That was Wilder's daughter's husband. They also worked on a plan of development for the Roan Mountain. And in 1959, it was estimated the number of visitors to the mountain exceeded 175,000. They announced plans to construct a new Cloudland Hotel atop the mountain. And these were artist renditions of that plan. Again, this would be around 1955, 56, 57 in that era. And this is where it would have been located. The gentleman here, D.J. Morris, who's the supervisor of Pisgah National Forest, is basically showing the location of this hotel in what it says here in 1950. So he's kind of pointing over to the direction of where the Cloudland stood, and that's where they were going to build it. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about something you may have heard of in Bakersville. In fact, when you drive into town from Spruce Pine, you'll notice you're on something called the Crimson Laurel Way. And you'll see there, I drew on the map something called the Crimson Laurel Way. I wanted to tell you a little bit about this. One of the projects that that committee promoted was developing this roadway connecting the Blue Ridge Parkway in Elizabethton, Tennessee to Roan Mountain. It was to be NC 226 from Spruce Pine to Bakersville, NC 261, which was completed in 1952 from Bakersville to the top of the Roan. That's 34 miles there. And then Tennessee Highway 143 down to US 19E from Roan Mountain to Elizabethton. This way was to give the parkway and its considerable traffic an easy accessed highway to the Roan. They worked with the women's clubs in Spruce Pine and Elizabethton to decorate the roadway with 15,000 plantings of rhododendron rootstock that was, guess what, dug on top of Roan Mountain. Now, this wasn't done without a plan. The rootstock was taken from the roadbed that was developed for a paved highway to the top of the mountain. That's at Carver's Gap. The 700 landowners who were identified being along this route were then allowed to get some of the rootstock and planted as long as it would be visible from the road. The plant was to have a flowering root, or the plan rather, was to have a flowering route to the top of the mountain from both towns. Now, this came on the heels of an early 1930s planting of white pines along this highway from Gillespie Gap to Spruce Pine to honor World War I veterans by the local chapter of the American Legion. However, the planning in this Crimson Laurel Way in terms of this long road between Elizabethton and the Parkway never came together. None of the rhododendron planted are apparently located along the route. The only part of the route still named that is the street there in Bakersville, and it's just keeping it in name only. Thought we'd show you some pictures of them doing the digging, though. This is the town of Spruce Pine, one of the trucks up on the road, and you'll see here they are loading rhododendron on the back of that truck from the top of Roan Mountain. They haul it down to Spruce Pine. This is behind the depot on Lower Street, and they're setting out the buds of the road, or the roots of the rhododendron for them to come back and bloom on Lower Street. And let me back up real quick and just tell you that not a single one of these plants is still in Spruce Pine. So every one of them died when they took them off the mountain. Okay, let's talk a bit about the rhododendron queen. I'm going to be real quick here. This is the first one, crowned in 1948. Her name is Betty Peoples, and she was crowned atop Roan Mountain. In fact, for many years, they always crowned the queens on top of Roan Mountain. Now, the first North Carolina rhododendron queen was crowned in 1952, and that's Zula Kate Smith. You see her picture every year at the Rhododendron Festival in Bakersfield. At the urging of the Forest Service, and maybe you might be wondering, in 1959, the Forest Service asked Tennessee and North Carolina to separate their celebrations into two different festivals to spread out the crowds on top of the Roan. They just felt it was too crowded up there, so they asked there to be a North Carolina Rhododendron Festival and a Tennessee Rhododendron Festival, and the two still hold those to this day separately. And the fellow that worked so hard on the North Carolina side, and the gentleman I told you that claimed he saw the cloudland burn on top of the mountain, is Cal Calhoun, or O.D. Calhoun. He was the founding editor of the weekly newspaper in Spruce Pine. It was called, well, it's now called the Mitchell News Journal. It was called the Industrial Record back then. He also was a founder of WTOE Radio. He was one of the investors in that, member of the Mitchell County Chamber of Commerce, and a driving force behind local talent broadcasts called the Carolina Barn Dance that was held at the Carolina Theater in Spruce Pine. And he was very, very responsible for the heyday of the Rhododendron Festival in the 1960s. He also worked on the Dogwood Festival in Statesville, North Carolina, the Blueberry Festival in Elizabethton, Tennessee, and was given the Order of the Longleaf Pine in North Carolina, the highest civilian honor, in 2004. And Cal passed away just a few years ago, and he was 107, if I remember correctly, when he died. Just a charming man. I got to meet him, and there is an interview that we did with him that is on YouTube. Just look up Cal Calhoun or O.D. Calhoun, and you can see it there. He tells his story and tells about the barn dance. Now, this is a picture of the celebration of the opening of the road atop Roan Mountain in 1952. Look at that crowd. Everybody wanted to be up there because that was their first chance to drive a car up on the mountain on a good highway. This is a gentleman, Robert Cook Kefauver and Nancy Kefauver. That is the presidential candidate Estes Kefauver's dad and wife. And they are receiving a coonskin cap in this picture from Tweetsie Railroad during those celebration ceremonies in 1952. Kefauver won the New Hampshire primary while campaigning in his coonskin cap that he got from atop Roan Mountain. Okay, let's see if you know who these guys are. I'm going to tell you who they are. Let me back up and tell you I know all of them but one. Okay, let's put their names up and go through them real quick. S.T. Henry on the left, the publisher of the Tri-County News. Mr. George Ross there in the second gentleman, and I do not know much about him and have not been able to find out. Gordon Browning was the governor of Tennessee at the time of this dedication. That's him in the third. And then on the right, yes, that is Albert Gore's dad, Albert Gore Sr., and he was the U.S. Senator from Tennessee in 1952. Here's another photo of Gordon Browning. He's getting the coonskin cap with David Marshall Carbine Williams in that year. So Williams Carbine, he ran an illegal distillery near Goblin, North Carolina, and in 1921, the Cumberland County Sheriff and 5 deputies seized the still and product after the workers fled. While they were transporting the evidence away from the scene, the deputies came under gunfire from the woods. Riding away from the scene in the police car sideboard, Deputy Sheriff Alfred Jackson Pate was struck by 2 bullets and died at the scene, and Carbine Williams was arrested for the murder the following day. On November 25th, 1921, he received a sentence of 30 years of hard labor to wear felon stripes for the murder of Deputy Pate. And on the same day, one of the black workers employed by Williams, Ham Dawson, was indicted and tried in the Cumberland County Court on the charge of secret assault on Deputy Pate. Williams testified that he had fired the first couple of shots but did not intend to kill the deputy. He gave the rifle to Dawson, who fired the remaining shots with the intent to kill the deputy. The same day, the all-white 12-man jury voted 12-0 for acquittal, and Dawson was released. So while serving time at the Caledonia State Prison in Halifax County, North Carolina, Williams related to the superintendent of his mechanical aptitude, and they allowed him access to the prison's machine shop, and there he demonstrated a knack for fashioning his own tools. He began servicing the weapons used by the guards. His skills in the machine shop let him stay ahead of his assignments, and allowed him to develop his ideas for self-loading firearms. And he designed and built 4 semi-automatic rifles while he was in prison. All 4 used a high-pressure gas in the breech. This means that there was a floating chamber that let the cartridge fire everything off. And all 4 of these rifles are part of the David Marshall Williams display at the North Carolina Museum of History in Raleigh. So Carbine, his family starts a campaign to commute his sentence. They were joined by the sheriff to whom he had surrendered, and the widow of the man convicted of the killing was approached and agreed the sentence would be commuted if his work would help the country. So in 1927, Angus McLean commutes the sentence, and he was discharged in 1929. Carbine goes on, lives in Eastern North Carolina. He actually dies at Dorothea Dix Hospital in 1975. Now, the fictional legend of Carbine Williams has garnered him more attention over the years, but his design, redesign, and development of firearms that used high-pressure gas, well, that is a significant contribution achieved in the design and development of firearms to this day. And he's holding one of the rifles there in that picture on top of Roan Mountain. Now, that brings us to the end of our presentation. So in closing, I wanted to quote something, but let me tell you a little bit about the view there. That is the famous rhododendron gardens. This would have been made during the height of the blooms in June. And that mountain you're looking at in the distance is Mount Mitchell from the top of the Roan. And you're basically overlooking the Toe River Valley in Mitchell and Yancey County right there. So Margaret Morley, who is another famous writer that visited Roan Mountain and Mount Mitchell. In fact, she's got a book about a little squirrel named Little Mitchell that is hilarious. But she also wrote a book called The Carolina Mountains. And she tells a story that I think is a fitting way for us to end the presentation tonight. She said, the people of Mitchell County hold Roan Mountain in great esteem. One time around the turn of the 20th century, a visitor came to Bakersfield to address a missionary society. She told of the wondrous things she'd seen in her travels, and when she finished, there was polite silence. Then the story goes, one of the Bakersfield women looked intently at her and said, those are mighty beautiful places that you've described, but I've got a question for you. Have you ever been to the Roan? And that brings our presentation this evening to a close. So let me exit out of this and see if I can get back over here and get everything turned on. I want to see if I can unmute everybody. Let me, I'm allowing everybody to unmute themselves, and we've got the chat area open, and I will be happy to take questions and comments, anything you'd like to know about tonight's presentation. And if you want to turn your camera on, you're welcome to do that too. Do we have anything in chat? Ooh, okay. I see everybody is still muted. I thought I could unmute everybody. I thought I just had to.
Thank you, David. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, everybody.
That was absolutely incredible. That was just incredible. Thank you so much.
Okay, I have got everybody set to where they can unmute themselves. Okay, and
thank you very much.
I didn't see it all, but what I saw was fabulous. I hope we have a recording of this because I'd love to see it from the start.
Yes, we have a recording. It will be on our Mitchell County Historical Society website.
Fabulous.
The whole thing. That was really neat, David. Thank you so much.
That was incredible.
David, this is Tom Best. That was an excellent job. Can you tell us what houses in there that have the some of the wood from
the woodwork?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can tell you one I know of for sure, Dan or Mr. Pike. If you are leaving Glen Eyre, heading up on the Roan, you will pass, of course, the gas station, the Murphy gas station, and you'll pass where the Brethren Church is at. And on past it, there is a house on the left, slightly up off the road. It's an older style house. It's got a big front porch on it. But if you will look along the top of that house porch, and there's another one on it a little past on the right, there's some ornate woodwork across the top of that porch. And I was told, and this is several years ago, I was told that was taken from the Cloudland and put on those houses.
Oh.
Oh, Tom Best? I'm sorry, Tom. I thought it was David. Sorry.
That's okay. The reason I asked, I own a house up here that was built in 1810, and I've been told, I don't know what's true and what's not, that it has some of the some pieces from it, and it's kind of a gingerbread house, is what we call it. But it's still occupied, and it's got a lot of interesting things. You'll have to come up and see it sometime.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. All right, so I've got some questions I'm looking at here. Let me see if I can scroll through these and just answer them out of chat. And again, you're welcome to unmute your mic too and ask. Let me start with this one from Kim Forey. She asked how far it was from Hughes Gap to Carver's Gap. That's a good question, because basically you have to go around the road to get up there. I'd say probably 15, 16 miles, somewhere in there. I mean, it's a good haul. You have to go all the way basically down to Fork Mountain. There's like a barn, and then you turn left on Fork Mountain Road. That will take you across to NC 261, and then you go up that road to get up to Carver's Gap on the North Carolina side. So, Kim, I hope that answers your question. I'm just guessing at that mileage. I don't know that for sure, but I do know you have to go all the way around the road to get there.
I'd like to point out also that when I was in high school, we did a hiking trip up to the Rhone, and you go up Googes Creek, and that's where you get the road, the original road that would be taken by the people who are on carriages. And so it's a very interesting, if you can find an old map of the soil, that's what we used when we hiked up there. But that old road goes up around all the way up to the top. So that's where you go up Googes Creek to get that.
Okay, Sarah Connors has put a question and wanted to know where the cabin that the hikers still use is at. So, Sarah, the easiest way to describe that, the parking lot I talked about there, and you walk out through the rhododendron gardens, and you keep going on out toward the Roan High Knob. Well, the Appalachian Trail wanders a little bit through there, and then kind of cuts down off that area a little bit, but it heads out toward the Roan High Bluff, and that cabin is out in there. And again, it is a shelter for folks on the Appalachian Trail. They stop there and use it to this day as a shelter. So you can still see that. Now, again, as I mentioned, the fire tower, heck, it was up on Locust Knob. Daniel helped me. It's probably up there 70 years, I guess. Somewhere around in there, and they took it down. It hadn't been that long ago that they took it off of the knob up there. But again, it was funny because they put it on top of Roan Mountain simply because they thought we're up high, we can look forever, we can see where there's fire, and then 3/4 of the time it's in the fog, so they can't see anything. And they had the same thing happen on Mount Mitchell with a tower up there, so it was not useful for fire spotting at that time. Okay, other questions, feel free. You can chime in. You can type them over here in chat, whatever.
David, do the geologists know yet why the bald has no trees? Is it the wind or some sort of electromagnetic pulse up there? Someone was telling me that the geologists were studying that area because, right across the street, you got lush, flora, and then the bald is bald.
All right, so Jermaine, David, I see your hand up. We'll get to you in just a second. Jermaine, I can tell you kind of what I've heard over the years, because honestly, I've covered the Rhododendron Festival for the radio station for years, and then I've talked to people. I've talked with Ms. Bauer, and they've noted that in recent years there is starting to be encroachment on the balds by the trees. Part of that may be related to climate change. Part of it's related to the fact that they're not grazing a lot of animals up there right now. So they think that there's a combination of factors that kept it going, over the years. But it was there definitely Revolutionary War times. Yellow Mountain Gap, when they crossed the Over Mountain Men crossed the Yellow Mountain Gap, which is just down the hill from the Rhone. and they talk about the balds down there. So, so they've been there a long time, but as to exactly why, I don't think they've ever come to a decision about that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. David, if you will, go ahead.
This is his wife, Martha Pike.
Okay.
And my question is, when did the Roan Mountains start having the Angora goats come up there and have this electrified fence that would eat the kudzu, and it would be very mobile from place to place? It's always interested me, and I joined Friends of the Roan many years ago to have one of those goats and to go up there and watch it. Do you know how all that came about and when?
Well, as I mentioned in the talk, we know that General Wilder had Angora goats up there. So this would have been in the 1870s. So,
wow,
you know, it would have been a long time ago. So he had a herd of them up on the mountain when the Cloudland was up there. So, you know, 150.
Well, how did the kudzu get there? That's just devastating everything up there, except the Angora goats is eating them, the kudzu. Do you know anything about that part?
I sure don't. If somebody in here might, you know, have an idea about that, that's probably a little beyond me. I do history. I don't know an awful lot about, you know, about biology, I guess. But, you know, it's an invasive species. So somebody may have brought it, you know, and thought, hey, we'll set it out and, you know, protect some land, because it does spread rapidly, you know, and holds ground.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd say that's probably what got it started. And then, of course, once it gets somewhere, it entrenches itself.
Thank you, David. I enjoyed your talk so much.
Now,
If
again,
you go up there, there's not a lot of kudzu up there. And I'm not sure that kudzu exists in that environment. Of course,
There's
kudzu.
tons of it up there. It was a few years ago when I used to hike up there. I don't understand that when you say there's not much up there.
where exactly was it up there at? Just be curious.
It was in between the balls, and you would have to go kind of slope down where the Angora goats were, and a biologist, I don't know who, but a random biologist would navigate the goats when they finished eating the kudzu and move them somewhere else. So I saw just tons of it, and that was at least 4 years ago I saw that.
Huh. Okay. I'm not, I don't know what to tell you about that. That might be something we can look into and get back to you on.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Any other questions about the inn or about the history? Okay. Why did the hotel ultimately close? And what was the other one you said, honey?
Turn it up.
Let me do this one first, and then we'll get that one. So, Roger and Jill Whitson asked, why did it ultimately close? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Well, several of them. Oh, yes? Okay. Let's see. Somebody's talking a little bit. Let me finish. Okay. Let me try to answer this, Roger. There's a lot of things. First off, the ultimate reason it didn't make it, I guess, is the very short season. He apparently only opened the hotel, and then the later proprietors. So let me back up and say, so they opened it in 1884. Wilder basically ran it to around 1892, 93, and he decided that I guess he kind of lost interest in it, maybe. And he moves back to Knoxville, you know, to run some of his businesses, and leaves it with caretaker proprietors, you know, people to run it. So they would have a very short season. I know I told you one of them there, they didn't open until July 10th that year, and they were only open 2 months. They closed at the end of September. So, you know, a very short season. You're looking at a time with no electricity on the mountain. So One of the things I neglected to mention, they did have steam heat. It was we used a wood-fired boiler. They would bring wood up there, and the steamed heat, of course, you know, a modern convenience, but they use that to heat the whole thing. But again, you know, I think just the combination of that, they again had proprietors, some of which didn't have very deep pockets, you know, and they'd have to move on to the next one and the next one. I think Mr. Mural that I mentioned, he probably had the longest run. I think he had about 10 years up there, but even he gave up, like I said, in 1905. You know, that was the last year it was open as what we'll call a regular hotel. Then what they did after that, there were caretakers, you know, that watched it for Mr. Wilder, and they would occasionally open it and let people just come stay in it. But I don't think it was ran like it was, you know, in its heyday at that time. And then again, 1913 was the last year anything like that was done. So, you know, ultimately, I think it's just a short season. You know, you have a clientele that has to come a distance. You know, they're from usually the low country of South Carolina, you know, the low country in Tennessee. They come up the mountain to escape the heat, to escape the hay fever, you know, things of that nature. But I do think, you know, just wasn't long enough. They couldn't get enough economic leverage. Oh, one more thing I should mention there. There was a panic called the Panic of 1893, which of course was an economic crisis in the United States. And
David, open
yes.
your video.
Uh-huh.
Open your video.
Okay. All right, there we go. Is that better?
Great.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So in 1893, there was, as I said, a panic, and Wilder lost a lot of money in the panic. In fact, that's probably one of the reasons that he kind of gave up on the Cloudland, was he had to go attend to business affairs, you know, to try to shore up his finances. But again, the hotel, while they thought it was going to do great, and it probably did in the first, you know, 3, 4, 5 years it was open, the short season combined with management, I think, did it in eventually. And again, 1913 was the end. And then you saw it within 2 years, it was falling down. It didn't take it long at all to start collapsing when they didn't have caretakers looking after it. Okay, what was the other question? Okay, so someone asked about that Bulletin Road up to the hotel. That is a very good question, because I, like many people, assumed that the route from Bakersville would be what we'll call Highway 261 today, you know, or Carver's Gap, because that is the side that the Tennessee folks came up, was to Carver's Gap and then cut out on the ridge. However, I was reading a little bit in Jennifer's book, and it said the North Carolina side, that they came up from Beulah Dean. If you know Beulah Dean, it is literally at the foot of the High Knob, or not the High Knob, the bluff. Excuse me. And it's pretty steep right there. I don't see how they could have come up the bluff, you know, up to it. So I'm sure there was some sort of a back and forth, maybe through Hughes Gap and then come up the Tennessee side or something like that, because I could see that. You know, they could have cut across Hughes Gap and picked up the Tennessee Road and took it to the top. Now, I also should mention that after the whole thing kind of fell in, there was a group of gentlemen in the 1920s that basically opened the road that Wilder had established. It went up there as a toll road, and you could pay and go up to the top of the run on the toll road. Kind of like what they did in Mount Mitchell when they took the railroad up there in the late 19-teens. Don't know a lot about that. I just read that, you know, a group of Johnson City businessmen had done that. So obviously it wasn't all that successful, because wasn't too long later they were agitating to get a good road built to the top of the mountain.
I'd like to point out that talking to the Harrell brothers, is that A.D. Harrell and his family used to bring up good produce up that road through Beulah Dean. So there had to be a good road that they could take up there. So it was a very interesting idea. I've never seen it, but they said the Harrell boys said that that's the way that they took produce up, and they made money taking it to the hotel.
One of the other things I might mention that's kind of interesting to me is that apparently Wilder, prospected for iron ore deposits. He thought there was this huge vein of iron ore running from Cranberry basically to the Nolichucky River. And he was bound and determined he was going to find it because he just knew it ran into Roan Mountain. So he came from Cranberry all the way down through there and dug here, there, and yonder, and he would occasionally find small iron mines, but he never did find that mother lode that he thought he would find. But he did run iron mines in that region all the way down to Poplar for a while until, they kind of petered out. But again, they were small mines. They weren't anything like they ran in Cranberry. And if you're not familiar with that mine at Cranberry, that was opened during the Civil War. And in fact, Isaac English of English Inn fame and Spruce Pine, that's where he worked when he spirited those 4 Union soldiers back to the northern lines in the middle of the Civil War. He worked at the Cranberry Iron Mine for the Confederacy.
There's one suggestion too that Wilder suggested that there be a tunnel driven through the mountain. Do you know about that?
No, I have not heard that, but it wouldn't surprise me with him.
But it would go through Magnetic City, all through there, and just one tunnel that would take all the iron ore through the tunnel.
Again, I think he was bound and determined that the Roan had iron ore, had a huge vein. And he may very well do it, but he never found it while he was digging for it. And the one in Cranberry peters out in, I think it's the 1930s, somewhere in there. It's when they finally, stopped digging for it. And of course, the flood of 1940 has really started the demise of the ET and WNC Railroad that we were talking about, or Tweetsie, as everybody knows it around here. It ran all the way to Boone. And then, of course, had a spur there at Cranberry, and they would load the iron ore and haul it back to Carnegie. And that's where they would, refine the ore, turn it into rails, whatever. And then Wilder, he kind of built that up. He had a buddy, Andrew Carnegie was a friend of his, and that's why it's called Carnegie. He also was buddies. I didn't mention this. He was buddies with Alexander Graham Bell, and Bell introduced him to the telephone and told him all about, how he saw that was going to be the future. And apparently Wilder poo-pooed it and called it a toy and would not invest in it. I thought that was kind of interesting. Anybody else? Because we'll be happy to talk as long as you got questions or want to know more.
Just remember that all you have to do is to give us an email address and your question if you have any more. And also, too, this recording will be available on the website, Mitchell County Historical Court, the Society website. So make sure that you keep in tune with us.
Let me mention, so the email address, easy to get to. You had to write programs at mitchellnchistory.org. You can send your questions there, and one of us will do our best to answer them. Be happy to do that. And I hope to have the video up in a little bit. I've got to, I'll have to do a little bit of cleanup on it, but we'll try to get it up in the next day or two if we can and make it available for everybody to watch.
I have a dumb question, but I always ask dumb questions. The water. I'm always amazed that people who live on top of mountains get water. Is it well? How deep did they have to dig to get water up at Cloudland for whatever it was that they needed it for?
Well, he didn't dig well. He had a spring. He found a natural mountain spring, and he basically, dammed it up and made that little pond that we saw the picture. And then he built a waterworks that, ran pipes back to the Cloudland, and that's how they brought the water in. I did find it very interesting that everybody just, raved over the 46-degree temperature water that they were drinking in the summertime without any ice in it. But to answer your question, Jermaine, it was done with springs. They didn't have wells drilled on the mountain.
They didn't drill. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I don't know, and Daniel, I don't know if you know exactly where that waterworks was at. It would have had to been down the hill from it somewhere.
I mean, does it still exist?
I
Well,
don't think
but-
so.
If you go up there, there are still some springs that are open.
Uh-huh.
And especially there at Carver's Gap, if you go down below Carver's Gap, just up a ridge, you're going to find a spring that has wonderful, wonderful cold water now. And there are several places up there. So I don't know where that was, but of course it's available. Good cold water is available up there anytime.
And again, you know, that was one of the selling points. You know, you could have this fresh, cold water. You know, you could, you know, be up here above where the allergies bother you, and it was cool. And you know, that was the clientele he was looking for. Again, roughly $250 a week, but you got 3 meals a night. You did have to share your bathroom with about 50 people, but you know, I guess that's something we trade off for the luxury that was there at the time. But I thought it was kind of interesting. He did all that work and then only put 4 bathrooms in the entire thing.
How do you have any idea how those bathrooms were created? Where did it go? How did it go out? Was it just people taking it out as they accumulated, or do you know anything about that?
Don't know
never
any,
heard of
yeah, I don't know anything about that. Just know that, you know, in several places, not just in Jennifer's book, but the other places, they make a big deal out of the fact that there's only 4 bathrooms in it. So that tells me, you know, maybe it was like a chamber pot situation. It wasn't like, you know, a modern bathroom per se
No. Yeah.
or something.
That's one of the fascinating things that when my wife and I traveled to historic sites, I said, where did people go pee? You know, where'd they go poop? You know, and what happened to it? It's a very incredible, interesting thing.
Now, I will note something interesting about Roan Mountain. The big 3, Grandfather, Mount Mitchell, Roan Mountain. What is the unique thing about Roan Mountain of those 3, besides the fact it's second in line in terms of size between the 3? Anybody know? Got a guess? Okay, it is the only one of the 3 that does not have electricity on it. There are no electrical lines run on Roan Mountain.
And why is that?
I guess it has to do with the Forest Service, Jermaine. It's the only thing I'm guessing. Again, you know, they had all these plans in the 50s, and I'm sure that it would have been electrified had they built, you know, the new hotel. And I know I didn't really get into this, but when they were looking at building the hotel, they were talking about an ice skating rink. They were looking at doing a ski resort where you could come and ski. They were, you know, looking at all sorts of things. And I guarantee you there would have been electricity for that had it been built. It's interesting to me, they developed the plans and they were out there and anyone could bid on them. And the plan was that you would build it and operate it, but it would still eventually, I guess, belong to the Forest Service. Anyway, apparently nobody bid on the plans and they are still somewhere where you can see them. I need to go, we need to find them, you know, and look at the plans and see what was out there and maybe try to figure out why nobody decided to buy it and, you know, try to do it. That's a good question. Anything else? Okay, here, let me see. Somebody has wrote, Kim Hughes put in, says, my Charles Hughes owned 2,500 acres from Hughes Gap to Burbank, Carter, Tennessee. One day he set out for the mouth of the Rock Creek, heading for the mouth of the creek to take some corn to the grist mill. This is a short distance, but he was gone for 7 days. When he returned, he had cornmeal and a jug of liquor. Charles liked to fiddle and dance. I wonder if a walk to the cloud was on his route to entertain the folks at that time. That's a good question, Kim. I don't know the answer there. I don't know if anybody's never has, you need to go up and go across Hughes Gap and come out down in Burbank in Tennessee. That's kind of an interesting little ride. You don't really realize that you can go into Tennessee from North Carolina there from basically the middle of Beulah Dean. So it's the road just past the school, not the one that not the first one, but the second one where it's like it was a little restaurant and it's where the garbage station is at. The road that turns just before all of that, you just follow that road and go across Hughes Gap and you come out over in Tennessee, now down near the state park.
That's a great ride. Great
It is.
ride.
Yeah, and people don't know about it. You know, it's one of the secrets around here. Just a beautiful ride, and you see just awesome scenery. I just can't recommend it enough. So, you know, if you're out one Sunday afternoon, that'd be a nice little ride to do. I'm just curious who we've got in here, how far away you might be from Mitchell County. I know we had people from South Carolina, down east in North Carolina. I think I even had someone from California who said they were going to be in here tonight. So just curious if you type in text where you were from this evening, because we might consider doing things like this again in the future, just simply because there are people who can't get to Bakersville for our meetings. You know, we thought we'd try this because we honestly, we've missed being able to do this. I think I'm speaking for Daniel and Jermaine both. You know, all of us enjoy sharing these stories with you. It's not just, you know, something that we do because we have to. I think we all really get into learning about this stuff and then telling you about it.
A while back in one of the, you know, the secondhand stores, I gave a copy of the letters to the you know, the society from Mrs. McBee, and maybe we could have something where someone could read her letters to and from her son or her husband during the war and things of that nature, to kind of like give us an idea of where things were back then.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see we've got someone from Maryland. Wow. Annapolis, Maryland. So we're glad, Kim, we're glad to have you tonight. Glad you were able to join us. Now, I will also throw out, when we get back to our regular programs, which we hope to do sometime this summer, you know, where we have them in person, we are trying to look into a way where we could stream them like this. So you would not have to be in Bakersville or wherever we're having the program. You know, you'd be able to watch it on Zoom. Not going to promise it because we have to figure it out, but we are going to try to do that. And there are plans right now. I think Kathy's run off on me, I believe. Kathy Huey is working on one with Rhonda, and they're going to do it in May, and it's going to be about roads in Mitchell County. And when I say that, it sounds like, what's that mean? Well, they're going to talk about the Yellow Mountain Road, which was the first path up through our area. They're going to talk about Bright's Trace. They're going to talk about a lot of different things, maybe even the origin of a lot of roads you ride on today that start back in Revolutionary War times that you may not know. But they're going to do that one in May, third Monday in May, and it'll be here on Zoom, and we'll be announcing it soon, I'm sure. Let's see. I've got a couple more. Richmond, Virginia is checked in. Marietta, Georgia. Wow. Deerfield Beach, Florida. Johnson City, we are just tickled pink to have all of you tonight. And if you would consider becoming a member, it's $25 for an individual, $30 for a family, but that helps, you know, fund our activities. Like we have to pay for the Zoom here every year. We have an office that we run in Bakersville that we staff, you know, so we have expenses that we do, and we'd love to have you as a member, you know, to help out with that, Daniel, I guess we probably ought to talk a little bit about Apple Butter Festival. We have had a couple of people wondering if that was coming back, and the plan is now, yes. We'll be having apple butter on October 9th. It will be in Bakersville. It will, if you go to the front page of our website, mitchellnchistory.org, you can read what we've got up there right now, which is just, you know, save the date. If you're a vendor, somebody who wants to sell something at it, we've got a place for you to sign up to do that. But we will be posting more about the festival as we get a little bit farther along. We're working all that out right now.
One of the things that we're going to do for sure, as long as we're in compliance with all the health department regulations, we will have real apple butter created at the festival.
Yes.
And it may be some of us will start at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you know, that's going to be fun, but it will be real apple butter. And we'll also have real apple butter to sell.
Yes.
has been created in the traditional way. So we'll hopefully in October, check out our website. We will have an Apple Butter Festival, which will celebrate the history of the area and also the genealogy of the area. So keep that in mind and check out our website.
Okay. Anything else anybody would like to ask tonight? Well, again, we greatly appreciate everybody, number one, taking the time out of your evening to be with us. Hopefully you found it entertaining. And again, hopefully we've answered a few questions, maybe made you a little more interested in that. I do hope you'll head up on the road now and go see where it was, because there is a plaque that shows you exactly where it's sat. So you can go up there and see, but again, there's none of the foundation left, so you won't be able to tell that, but you can get an idea. It faced into North Carolina. And as I mentioned, it's interesting to me that the eastern part of it was in Tennessee and the western part of it was in North Carolina. I really want someone to go up there and show me how that line meanders through there, because it sounds kind of interesting that the way that they've done it. And again, I think that Wilder kind of knew that, and that's why he built it the way that he did, so he'd have that unique feature as part of the Cloudland.